My husband put me out and kept all my assets just to hand them over to his mistress. All I have left is a worn-out debit card my father left me. I thought the balance was zero, but it ended up making the bank manager tremble with fear. Come on, tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so we can unravel this mystery together. The thick, humid heat of an Atlanta summer hit Zalika's skin the moment she stepped out of the Uber. She had spent 2 weeks in a tiny, dusty town in Alabama, down in the sticks, taking care of her mother who had been critically ill. Now that her mother was stable, Zalika was returning home, longing for the comfort of her luxury penthouse and, of course, her husband, Kwesi. She dragged her small suitcase through the lobby of the Sovereign, one of the most prestigious apartment buildings in Buckhead, right in the heart of Atlanta's wealth. A smile spread across her face when the elevator chimed on the 30th floor. She was exhausted but happy to be home. The hallway was cool and quiet. She arrived in front of door 30A, her penthouse. Zalika dug around in her purse and pulled out the key fob for the apartment. She tapped the card against the digital reader on the door. Beep, beep. A red light flashed. Access denied. Zalika frowned. She tried again. Beep, beep. That's strange. Maybe the card got demagnetized, she murmured. She rang the doorbell twice. There was a moment of silence. Then footsteps could be heard inside, followed by the soft click of the lock turning from the inside. The heavy door swung open. There stood Kwesi, her husband, but he wasn't the Kwesi she knew. The man's eyes were cold. He was wearing a silk robe, and on his neck there was a fresh mark of bright red lipstick. "Ah, you're back already," Kwesi said, and it wasn't a welcoming greeting. Zalika's heart seemed to stop beating. "Kwesi, why? Why isn't my key working?" Zalika asked. Her voice was trembling. "Because I changed the locks," Kwesi replied, still blocking the entrance. From inside the apartment, the crystal-clear laughter of a woman rang out. "Babe, who is it? If it's a solicitor, tell them to kick rocks." A young and very beautiful woman, much younger than Zalika, appeared over Kwesi's shoulder. Zalika recognized her instantly as Inaya, a local Instagram model who was gaining clout and who made Zalika's stomach turn. Inaya was wearing Zalika's silk robe, the very same robe Zalika had gifted herself for her wedding anniversary last year. Inaya's eyes swept over Zalika from top to bottom, judging her simple travel clothes, her tired face, and her worn-out suitcase. "Oh," Inaya said with a mocking smirk, "it's not a solicitor. Turns out it's the ex-wife." "Ex-wife? Kwesi, what is this?" Zalika whispered, feeling a stinging burn in her eyes. "Who is she? Why is she in our house? Why is she wearing my clothes?" Kwesi sighed as if Zalika were a trivial nuisance. "Listen, Zalika, this is over. Better we talk downstairs. Don't make a scene here." Kwesi didn't even give her a chance to step inside. He stepped out into the hallway, closing the door behind him, leaving Inaya smiling smugly on the inside. Kwesi didn't speak at all while they rode down in the elevator. Zalika was petrified. Her brain wasn't capable of processing what had just happened. The smell of Inaya's perfume, an expensive scent that wasn't to her taste at all, lingered faintly on Kwesi's robe. The elevator chimed, opening into the busy lobby. It was evening rush hour. A few other residents looked at them with curiosity. Kwesi walked quickly toward a corner of the lobby, somewhat secluded, near a large floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Peachtree Road. Zalika followed him like a robot. "Kwesi, explain this to me," Zalika demanded. Her voice was barely audible. "What is there to explain?" Kwesi said coldly. "Is it not clear? No, you and I are done, finished, just like that, after 10 years. After I took care of your mother after her stroke last year, after building with you from ground zero?" Kwesi let out a cynical laugh. "Building with me from ground zero? Don't be ridiculous, Zalika. I am successful thanks to my hard work. You're just a burden. Especially after you spent so much time taking care of your mama in that country town, you forgot your duties as a wife." "My duties? Yes, look at you." Kwesi pointed at Zalika with disgust, disheveled, unkempt. I am a major developer. I need a partner on my level, not a housewife like you." Zalika's jaw dropped. The man in front of her seemed like a complete stranger. Inaya? So it's been going on this whole time? "Yeah, we've been together a year," Kwesi said without a shred of guilt, "and she understands me much better." Suddenly, a building security guard approached, pushing a small, tattered duffel bag. The same bag Zalika used when they first moved to Atlanta years ago. Kwesi took the bag and threw it at Zalika's feet. The contents spilled out a little, just some old clothes and a wallet. "Those are your things." "The rest I threw out," Kwesi said. Then he tossed a brown envelope onto the bag. "Those are the divorce papers. I've already signed them. Inside is a settlement. All the assets, this penthouse, the cars, the company, everything is in my name. You came into this marriage with nothing. You leave with nothing." The tears finally escaped Zalika's eyes. This wasn't just a humiliation, it was an annihilation. You can't do this. Oh, I can, and I already have." Kwesi looked at her with eyes as cold as ice. "Sign those papers. If you behave yourself and don't claim marital assets, maybe I'll be generous and give you cash for a Greyhound bus ticket back to your little town in Alabama." Some people in the lobby started to whisper. Seeing the scene, Zalika felt naked. "Get out," Kwesi hissed. "But this is my home too." "Not anymore," Kwesi shouted. "Security." 2 security guards approached. They looked uncomfortable, but they were clearly on the side of Kwesi, the owner of the penthouse. "I'm sorry, ma'am." "Please don't make a scene," one of them said, gently grabbing Zalika's arm. Zalika was dragged out by force. She looked back, staring at Kwesi with desperation. "Kwesi, please!" Kwesi just looked at her blankly, then turned around and walked toward the elevator. Up above, near the mezzanine railing, Zalika could see Inaya's silhouette watching her victory. The heavy glass door of the lobby hissed shut behind Zalika. Separating her from the life of the last 10 years, she was thrown onto the busy sidewalk under the Atlanta sky, which was starting to darken, with only a duffel bag of old clothes and the divorce papers that insulted her. Night fell quickly in Atlanta. The streetlights began to flicker on, but for Zalika, the whole world seemed dark. She walked aimlessly. The sound of honking horns from the heavy traffic on Peachtree sounded like roars in her ears. She had nowhere to go. Her mother in Alabama was still in recovery. She couldn't add the weight of this news to her mother's burden. Her feet carried her to Centennial Olympic Park. She sat on one of the empty benches, staring at the skyline. Her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten since morning. Ironically, all around her, the restaurant patios were coming alive. The aroma of barbecue ribs, fried catfish, and waffle cones floated in the air, making her stomach ache even more. People laughed. Young black couples walked hand in hand. Zalika felt like a ghost, invisible, non-existent. She opened the wallet Kwesi had thrown at her. Inside was about $10 in cash, not even enough for a night in a cheap motel on the outskirts. She pulled out her phone. Battery was at 5%. She rushed to open the mobile banking app for their joint account. Balance, 0. Kwesi had cleaned her out, draining every dollar they had together, which also included the savings Zalika had before getting married. A cold, heavy despair wrapped around her. It was over. She was truly at rock bottom. She would be homeless tonight. Tears fell without making a sound. She looked down at the contents of her wallet again. Behind the card slot was a faded photo, a picture of her father. Her father, Tendai Okafor, a simple tobacco farmer and merchant who died 10 years ago, just before Zalika married Kwesi. And behind that photo was something else. Zalika's trembling fingers pulled it out, a faded blue debit card that was already peeling at the edges. The logo was barely legible. Heritage Trust of the South, a small, old regional bank. Zalika was stunned. She remembered now that her father gave her this card when she was 17, back when she was moving out for the first time to go to college at Spelman. "Keep this, my baby girl," her father had said back then, using a loving tone. His voice was soft but firm. "This is an account Papa created for you. Never use it unless it is absolutely necessary. Don't mix it with money for your expenses. Imagine it doesn't exist. How much is in it, Papa? She had asked curiously. Her father just smiled mysteriously. Enough to be an anchor. If you ever feel like your ship is going to sink, if you ever feel like your ship is going to sink. Back then, 17-year-old Zalika had laughed. Sink? Papa, I'm just going to college, not the middle of the ocean. You never know what kind of storms life brings, my child, he'd replied, his dark hands wrapping around hers as he placed the card in her palm. Promise me you won't touch this unless you have tried everything else. This is the very last anchor. Do you understand? She had nodded and promised, not really believing she would ever need it. Now, years later, sitting alone on a cold park bench in downtown Atlanta with $10 to her name, Zalika realized she had finally reached that moment. Her ship had not just hit a storm, it had already sunk. Her fingers tightened around the old plastic. Papa, she whispered into the humid night, if this is really an anchor, I need it now. Her phone buzzed weakly in her hand, the battery icon red and blinking. She had maybe minutes before it died for good. If she was going to do anything, it had to be now. Zalika stood, slung the duffel bag over her shoulder, and walked back toward Peachtree Street. The sidewalks were still crowded with people heading to restaurants and bars. Laughter spilled from open doors, music thumped from speakers, ride-share cars honked as they double-parked. Against all that noise, she felt like she was wrapped in glass. She moved through the crowd, but no one really saw her. A block away, she spotted the blue glow of an ATM sign, Heritage Trust of the South, now a division of Southern Gate Bank. Her breath caught. Her father's bank had been small, old-fashioned, rarely seen outside rural towns. Yet here, on a sleek downtown corner, was its name, folded under a newer, bigger one. Zalika walked toward the ATM like she was approaching an altar. The metal felt cool under her fingers as she slid the faded card into the slot. For a terrifying second, she thought the machine would spit it back out, unreadable after all these years. Instead, the screen blinked. Please enter your PIN. Her heart pounded. Could she remember it? Her mind flared back to the day at 17 when her father sat beside her at the kitchen table, helping her choose 4 numbers that felt like home. Her late mother's birthday. She tapped it in, hands shaking. The machine whirred. PIN accepted, select transaction. Zalika exhaled shakily. Balance, she whispered, pressing the button. Please let there be something, anything. The screen took longer than usual to load. She watched the spinning icon, silently begging it not to freeze. Finally, the number appeared. For a moment, her brain refused to understand. It wasn't hundreds. It wasn't thousands. The string of digits seemed to stretch across the screen. Her first thought was that the machine had glitched and added zeros by mistake. Her available balance read $7,842, 390.17, almost $8 million. Zalika's knees nearly buckled. She grabbed the edge of the ATM to steady herself, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gulps. This can't be right, she whispered. It can't. People moved around her, oblivious. A group of tourists laughed loudly as they walked past, the scent of street food following them. A delivery driver rolled a cart of boxes through the door of the convenience store next to the ATM. No one knew she was staring at more money than she had ever imagined in her life. Her father, her quiet, tobacco-stained, soft-spoken father, had left her a fortune, and she had carried it around all these years like trash in an old wallet. Her mind began to race. If the number was real, she didn't need Queasy. She didn't need his penthouse, his cars, his smug face. She could buy her own place. She could fly her mother up to Atlanta and put her in the best clinic. She could breathe again. Then fear stabbed through the excitement. What if this was some kind of error? What if she tried to withdraw and the machine swallowed the card? What if the bank accused her of fraud? Her father's warning echoed in her head. Never use it unless it is absolutely necessary. Well, if tonight wasn't absolutely necessary, nothing ever would be. Still, she made herself think like her father would. Slowly, carefully. Don't be greedy. Test the waters. She selected withdrawal. The machine asked for an amount. Her fingers hovered over the keypad. She considered typing a huge number 10,000, 50,000, but forced herself to be cautious. 200, she murmured instead, tapping 200. If the account was frozen or wrong, that small amount might go through without anyone blinking. The machine hummed. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, with a mechanical whir, it spat out a neat stack of 20s. Zalika grabbed the cash with numb fingers. "Would you like a receipt?" "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, please." A thin strip of paper printed out. She snatched it. The bottom line confirmed it. Available balance, 7,842.190. 17. The same impossible number, only 200 less. It was real. Her father had made her a quiet millionaire and never told her. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't just from despair. "Papa," she whispered, pressing the card and the receipt to her chest. "What did you do?" Her phone buzzed again. Battery, 3%. She quickly opened her Maps app and searched. Heritage Trust of the South Branch near me. A location popped up just a few blocks away, an old building tucked between two modern glass towers. Perfect. She needed answers, and she needed them before her phone died and the night swallowed her whole. She shoved the cash into her wallet, slipped the card back into its slot, and hurried down the sidewalk. The branch looked out of place compared to the sleek bank logos around it. The sign was old but well kept, the door heavy wood with brass handles. Inside, the decor was a strange mix of outdated carpet and upgraded monitors, like the bank had tried to drag itself into the modern era, but hadn't fully made it. A bell above the door chimed as she walked in. The lobby was almost empty. A single elderly man filled out a form at a side desk. Behind the long teller counter, two employees in blue shirts were tidying up stacks of paper. A woman in her 50s with neat gray braids looked up from her computer. Her name tag read, Ms. C. Whitaker, branch manager. "We're closing in 15 minutes, ma'am," she said politely. "But how can we help you today?" Zalika swallowed. "Hi, I just used one of your ATMs outside," she began, forcing her voice to sound steady. "I think there's a mistake with my account. The balance doesn't look right." Ms. Whitaker gave a small, patient smile. "That's usually the good kind of mistake," she said lightly. "Let's take a look. Do you have your card and ID?" Zalika handed over the old debit card and her driver's license. The manager's eyebrows rose slightly when she saw the card. "Well, I haven't seen one of these in a long time," she murmured. "This design is at least a decade old. When was the last time you used this account, Ms. Okafor?" "Never," Zalika admitted. "My father opened it for me when I was 17. I've never touched it." Ms. Whitaker's expression shifted, growing more focused. She slid the card into a reader at her desk and began typing rapidly. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Then her fingers stopped. Her eyes narrowed. She typed again, slower, double-checking what she was seeing on the screen. Her mouth parted slightly. She glanced up at Zalika with a look that was no longer casual. "One moment, Ms. Okafor," she said, her voice suddenly formal. "I'm going to pull up the full account profile, please. Have a seat." A strange cold weight settled in Zalika's stomach. She sat in one of the lobby chairs, watching as the manager clicked through more screens. The other tellers pretended not to notice, but Zalika saw one of them lean closer to his monitor, eyebrows knitting together. Ms. Whitaker reached for a small phone on her desk and pressed a button. "Ken, can you come to my office for a moment?" she said quietly. "Bring the due diligence file for legacy accounts flagged in Category A." Zalika's heart began to pound again. Legacy accounts? Flagged? Category A? What did that even mean? A moment later, a tall man in a navy suit emerged from a glass-walled office in the back. Unlike the tellers, he wasn't wearing the bank's simple blue shirt. His name tag read, Kenneth Lawson, Regional Compliance Officer, Regional. Why was a regional officer being called for one customer's balance issue? He walked over with a folder in hand, confusion on his face. "You needed me, Carlotta?" he asked the manager quietly. "Yes," Ms. Whitaker replied, her eyes still on the screen. "Take a look at this." She turned the monitor slightly toward him. Zalika watched as his relaxed posture stiffened. He flipped open the folder he'd brought and began comparing something in it to the information on the screen. His lips pressed together into a thin line. "Is this a joke?" he muttered under his breath. "I don't think so," Ms. Whitaker said. "The card read correctly at the ATM. She withdrew funds." Kenneth looked up sharply at Zalika, studying her as if seeing her for the first time. "Ms. Okafor," he said carefully, "did anyone tell you about the conditions on this account? Any special instructions?" Zalika clutched the strap of her bag. "No," she said. "My father just told me it was for emergencies. He passed away years ago. I never even knew how much was in it until tonight." The manager and the compliance officer exchanged a look that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Kenneth closed the folder slowly. "Carlotta," he said quietly, "you see the flag on that file?" "Yes," she replied, equally low. "And the authorization notes." He exhaled. "I'll need to call headquarters," he said. "This is way above branch level." Zalika felt the floor tilt under her. Is there a problem?" she asked. "Is the money not really mine? Did something illegal happen? I didn't know anything about this. I swear." Her voice cracked on the last word. She hated how small she sounded. Kenneth's expression softened just a fraction. "I'm not saying you did anything wrong," he said. "But this account was placed under a very specific internal protocol years ago. We just need to confirm how to proceed now that you've accessed it." He stepped away, taking out his phone instead of using the desk line this time. Whatever call he needed to make, he clearly didn't want it going through the main switchboard. Zalika watched him pace slowly in a corner, speaking in low tones she couldn't make out. Ms. Whitaker offered her a bottled water with a tight smile. "Try not to worry," she said. "Mr. Lawson is just doing his job." The bottle was cool, but Zalika's hands were clammy as she took it. From where she sat, she could see the reflection of Kenneth's face in the glass office window. It had gone pale. At one point, he rubbed his forehead hard like he was getting a headache. Finally, he ended the call and returned. "Head office wants us to bring her into the conference room," he said quietly to the manager, "and they want this handled very discreetly. No more front desk discussion." Something in his tone made Zalika's heartbeat drum in her ears. "Handled how?" she asked, standing up. "What does that mean?" Kenneth gave her a professional, almost stiff smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It means, Miss Okafor," he said, "that your father left you a great deal more than just money. And before we release any of it, there are some things you need to know, and some questions we are required to ask." He gestured toward a frosted glass door at the back of the branch. "If you'll please come with us," he added, his voice dropping slightly. "I think you're about to understand why this account made everyone at head office very nervous." Zalika's legs felt heavy as she followed Kenneth and Ms. Whitaker through the back of the branch. The air changed as soon as the door to the customer area closed behind them. The sounds of the lobby, printers, soft chatter, the old man filling out his form, all faded, replaced by a quiet hum of air conditioning and the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Kenneth opened a frosted glass door and gestured inside. "Please, have a seat," he said. The conference room was small but clean, with a long wooden table and a framed picture of the original Heritage Trust building on the wall, a little brick bank surrounded by cotton fields. It reminded Zalika of home so sharply that her chest ached. She sat at the end of the table, her duffel bag slumped at her feet like a tired dog. Kenneth took the chair opposite her. Ms. Whitaker sat to the side, a legal pad in front of her. On the table lay the folder he'd brought. the one he called the legacy accounts file. He opened it. "First," he said gently, "I need to verify a few things. This might feel intense, but it's necessary. Do you understand?" Zalika swallowed. "I'll answer whatever you need," she said. "Just please tell me if that money is really mine. I've had the worst day of my life. I don't think I can handle a bank telling me I've stolen something on top of everything else." Ms. Whitaker's expression softened. "No one is accusing you of stealing anything," she said. "If anything, we're trying to make sure you get what's rightfully yours. Without causing problems, we're not allowed to cause." That phrasing made Zalika's skin prickle. Kenneth glanced at the file. "Your full name is Zalika Tendai Okafor, born in Montgomery, Alabama, correct?" he asked. "Yes," she nodded. "Your father was Mr. Tendai Okafor, born in Enugu, Nigeria, later naturalized as a U.S. citizen?" "Yes," she said again, her heart tightening at the sound of his name. "And your mother is Ms. Bernice Okafor, currently residing in Pine Hollow, Alabama?" "Yes," she repeated, feeling suddenly exposed. "Why do you know all that?" "Because of this," Kenneth said, turning the folder so she could see. Inside was an old scanned document, the image of a paper with her father's handwriting at the bottom and several bank stamps across the top. At the heading it said, "Heritage Trust of the South Special Covenant Account, Tier A." Beneath that was her own name, written in careful cursive letters. "This account," Kenneth said, tapping the document, "was opened almost 15 years ago. Your father didn't just make a deposit, Ms. Okafor. He signed a covenant with the bank." "A covenant?" Zalika repeated. "What is that? Some kind of contract?" "In a way," Kenneth said. "Do you know what happened around that time? To this bank, I mean." Zalika shook her head. "I was in high school," she said. "All I cared about was getting into college." Kenneth leaned back in his chair. "Heritage Trust almost died," he said simply. "Bad loans, a regional recession. We were weeks away from being shut down by regulators." He nodded toward the photograph of the old building on the wall. "Your father was one of the last people who still trusted this bank," he continued. "He'd been using it for farm business since before I started here. When he heard what was happening, he didn't pull his money out like everyone else. Instead, he added money." Zalika blinked. "My father was never rich," she protested. "We struggled. I watched him count dollars to pay for fertilizer." Kenneth nodded. "That's true. Publicly," he said. "But he had one advantage other farmers didn't. He paid attention. For years, he'd been setting aside a portion of his profits into a separate account, investing quietly with some of our older wealth management officers. Nothing flashy, just careful, patient investing." Ms. Whitaker flipped to another page in the file and turned it toward Zalika. It showed numbers from years ago, modest amounts that grew steadily, then jumped sharply during a period when most people had lost their savings. "Your father moved his investments when the market crashed," she said. "He was cautious when others were greedy and bold when others were scared. By the time the bank got into trouble, he had already accumulated quite a bit." Kenneth picked up the story. "When we were on the brink of collapse, regulators required us to raise a certain amount of capital quickly," he said. "Your father offered to place a large sum, almost everything he had, into a special deposit with restrictive terms. That money strengthened our balance sheet. It's one of the reasons Heritage Trust survived long enough to later merge with Southern Gate Bank." Zalika stared at him. "You're telling me my father saved this bank?" she whispered. "In part," Kenneth said. "There were other measures, other investors. But his contribution, let's just say it was noticed." He tapped the covenant document again. "In exchange, the board offered him two things," he continued. "First, a very high interest rate, locked in for many years. Second, something unusual, a Tier A protected account. Essentially, a promise that his deposit and all interest would remain untouched, reserved exclusively for his designated heir, with strict privacy and protections." He pointed to a section near the bottom. The text was dense, but the key phrases were underlined in red. Funds may not be leveraged or loaned. Funds are to remain on reserve disbursement only upon appearance of designated heir with verified ID in case of heir's death or failure to appear by date X. Funds revert to Founders Foundation. Zalika's eyes skimmed downward and caught her own name again. So I'm the designated heir, she said slowly. What does failure to appear mean? It means exactly what it says, Kenneth replied. If you never used this card, never claimed the money, and certain conditions were met, the funds would eventually revert to a foundation and be used for community projects. The bank would no longer owe the deposit. When was the deadline? She asked. Kenneth's lips twitched. Next month, he said. The room seemed to tilt. Next month? She repeated. Miss Whitaker nodded. Your father must have believed that by then you'd either never need the money or you'd have needed it for something serious enough to come looking, she said. Either way, time was almost up. When you finally used the card tonight, you triggered an internal alert written into the system years ago. That's why the ATM took a bit longer than usual, Kenneth added. We got an automatic notification at head office. Designated heir has accessed Tier A Covenant account. He exhaled slowly. To be honest, most of us thought this account would quietly expire, he admitted. The original executives who approved it are retired or dead. The new leadership hates anything that looks unusual on the books. An $8 million reserve we can't touch, with strange conditions attached? It makes them nervous. Nervous enough to panic? Zalika asked softly. Nervous enough, Kenneth said carefully, that when I called just now, the CEO himself asked if you were really here, in person, sitting in my branch. And then he told me not to let you leave until we'd explained everything and gotten your signature on a modernized agreement. Zalika swallowed. So they're worried I'll just take it all and run? She asked. From a regulatory standpoint, Kenneth replied, if you suddenly withdrew the entire amount, we'd have to adjust several ratios overnight. It wouldn't kill the bank. He glanced at Ms. Whitaker. But headquarters would lose a lot of sleep and probably some hair. He gave a thin smile. From a legal standpoint, though, it's your money, he added. Every cent. There's no dispute about that. Silence settled over the room. Zalika stared at the folder, at her father's signature, at the underlined clauses. For 10 years of marriage, she had believed she was the one who came into the relationship with nothing, as Kwesi loved to say. All that time, she'd been carrying almost $8 million in a faded wallet. All that time, she'd endured his insults because she thought she was powerless. Her father had known better. Did he leave any message? She asked, her voice small. Anything for me? Ms. Whitaker flipped to the back of the file. There is one more document, she said softly. We're not required to give it to you, but if I were in your shoes, I'd want it. She pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed slightly with age. On the front, in her father's handwriting, were the words, for Zalika, only when she claims the anchor. Her throat tightened. Her fingers trembled as she took the envelope. May I? She asked, looking up. It's yours, Kenneth said. You don't need our permission. Zalika slid a finger under the flap and carefully tore it open. Inside was a single handwritten letter. She unfolded it. Her father's familiar script flowed across the page, neat and steady. My dearest Zalika, if you are reading this, it means the day I warned you about has come. I pray that I am wrong, and that you opened this letter simply because you were curious and not because you were desperate. But knowing you, my stubborn child, I doubt you would break our promise unless you truly had no other choice. I did not tell you about this money because I did not want it to become a cage. I have seen too many people change when they know they have a cushion. They stop trying. They stay in bad places because they think, if it gets too hard, I will just use the anchor. I did not raise you to live half awake, so I kept this quiet, and I watched you become a woman who tries with all her heart. I knew that one day life might be unfair to you. Maybe a man would betray you. Maybe the world would. Maybe you would betray yourself. When that day came, I wanted you to have two things: a way to stand up again, proof that you were never as small as cruel people tried to make you. This account is both. If you are sitting in that bank right now, know this: you owe nothing to anyone who treated you like you were lucky just to be in their presence. You were a blessing, not a charity case. Use this money to build a life where you are respected and where your mother can grow old in peace. Help others if you can. Be wiser than I was. And if any man ever looks at you and says, "You came into this with nothing," smile, my child. Let him speak. Only you and I will know the truth. With all my love, your Papa, Tendai Okafor. By the time she reached the signature, her tears were falling freely onto the page, smudging the ink slightly. The room was quiet. Kenneth looked away politely, giving her a moment. Ms. Whitaker slid a box of tissues across the table. Zalika dabbed her eyes and laughed weakly through the tears. "He always wrote like he was giving a sermon," she murmured. "It's a good sermon," Ms. Whitaker said gently. Zalika folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "So," she said, her voice steadier now, "what happens next?" Kenneth clasped his hands. "Next," he said, "we need to formalize your control over the account. That means updating your information, giving you access to proper banking tools, and, if you wish, introducing you to our private wealth division. They'll try to sell you a dozen things. You're free to say no to all of them." He hesitated. "But before that, there is one more delicate matter," he added. Zalika raised an eyebrow. "More delicate than nearly $8 million showing up out of nowhere?" she asked. He gave a small, humorless smile. "Head office asked me to inform you that because of the size and nature of the account, it has certain leverage," he said carefully. "The covenant gives you options other customers don't have. For example, if you wish to move the entire balance to another bank, Heritage Trust would feel it. Our liquidity ratios would dip. Our parent company would be unhappy." "Is that your polite way of saying you'd like me not to take all my money at once?" she asked. "Yes," Kenneth admitted. "We're hoping you'll consider a structured withdrawal over time. In return, the bank is prepared to make certain accommodations, interest rates, fees, lines of credit, that are usually reserved for large institutional clients." He slid a new document across the table. "At the very least," he said, "we'd like to start by moving you into a formal trust account with full legal protections. That would make it easier for you to use the funds without attracting the wrong kind of attention." Zalika thought of Kwesi's smug face in the lobby, of Inaya in her robe, of the security guards dragging her out like trash. "What kind of attention?" she asked lightly. "You mean like a greedy ex-husband who thinks I'm nothing without him?" Kenneth's eyes flickered. "We're obligated to protect client privacy," he said, "but if you plan to engage in any legal disputes, you may want to speak with an attorney before making large, visible purchases. Sudden wealth has a way of drawing lawsuits." A slow, unfamiliar feeling began to unfurl in Zalika's chest. Power. "So the bank is worried about me leaving," she said. "My ex is going to be worried when he realizes I don't need him. Everyone seems to be nervous except me." She sat up a little straighter. "I like this new balance," she added quietly. Ms. Whitaker's lips twitched. "Then let's make it official," she said. For the next half hour, they walked her through forms, address updates, signature cards, consent for a new card to be issued. They set up a secure online profile, complete with multi-factor authentication and a personal banker assigned to her. When they were done, Kenneth handed her a temporary debit card. "The permanent one will arrive in a few days," he said. "This is linked to a small sub-account we created from your main balance. It has enough for you to get somewhere safe tonight, Maybe a hotel, food, clothes, basic things. The rest remains in the protected account. Zalika looked at the card. It was plain with the bank's logo and her name embossed in silver. It didn't look like power, but it felt like survival. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for not treating me like a problem." Kenneth shook his head. "Trust me, Ms. Okafor," he said. "We've seen problems. You're not one of them. You're just the first person I've ever met who walked in here thinking she was broke and turned out to be one of our largest individual clients." He paused. "And I'm sorry for whatever made you finally use that card," he added. "Whatever it was, I hope this gives you room to breathe." She smiled faintly. "Oh, don't worry," she said. "It's going to do more than that." Outside, the night air felt different. Not lighter, exactly, but less suffocating. She stepped out of the bank and onto the sidewalk, clutching the envelope with her father's letter and the new card. The city lights reflected in the glass of the tall buildings, 1,000 little galaxies shimmering around her. For the first time since Kwesi had thrown her out, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a storm warming up. Her phone buzzed one last time before the battery gave out. It was a message from an unknown number. "Have you signed the papers yet? K." Her lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. She typed a reply as quickly as she could before the screen went black. "Not yet, but I just left the bank. Things have changed." She hit send. The message went out. Her phone died. Zalika slipped it into her bag, lifted her chin, and turned toward the bright lights of Peachtree. She had a cheap motel to book for the night, a lawyer to find tomorrow, and a husband to surprise in court very, very soon. 2 days after that night at the bank, Zalika's life no longer felt like someone else's nightmare. She woke up not on a park bench, not on a Greyhound bus to Alabama, but in a modest business hotel room just outside downtown. Clean white sheets, a hot shower, a real breakfast, all paid for with the temporary card the bank had issued her. For her, that flimsy piece of plastic had become a ticket back into a human life. She washed her face, took her father's letter out of the envelope, and read it again. The line, "You were never as small as cruel people tried to make you," burned even deeper than the first time. Then she dialed the number on a business card Kenneth Lawson had slipped her on the way out. "If you ever need legal help, call this man before you call anyone else." The lawyer's name was Melvin James. He wasn't some strip mall divorce attorney. His office took up half a floor in a glass tower, and the watch on his wrist could probably buy a small house. "Ms. Okafor," he said when she came in, "Mr. Lawson from Heritage Trust told me your situation is unusual." He listened to everything. The trip to Alabama, Inaya in her robe, the way Kwesi had thrown her bag and those divorce papers at her, the zero balance, the old card, the nearly $8 million, the covenant, the letter from her father. "So your husband is absolutely convinced you have nothing," Melvin summed up, leaning back in his chair. "That's good." "Good?" Zalika asked, incredulous. "For us," he clarified, "men like him rely on control. He already acted as if he'd won. To him, you're a problem that's already been solved. Judges, however, don't usually like men who throw their wives out on the street and strip every last dollar from the joint account, especially when we can show bank statements proving exactly that." He laid out the plan like a surgeon describing an operation. Request full statements on all of Kwesi's personal and business accounts, file for temporary support and a freeze on major asset transfers. Challenge the divorce settlement where she was supposed to leave with nothing. And, most important, keep the existence of her father's account strictly separate. It was her separate property, not marital. "You're under no obligation to disclose that inheritance to your husband or to the court," Melvin explained. "It was created before the marriage. He never knew about it, never contributed to it, never had access. He's not entitled to a cent. We're going to litigate as if you truly had nothing but the marital assets he tried to hide. But if the court thinks I'm broke and in need," she said quietly, "and I stay quiet about this money, is that fair?" Melvin looked at her over his glasses. "He put you on the sidewalk with $10, he said. "He used your previous savings to build himself up. He cheated in your bed under your roof and then called the police when you cried. If you're worried about fairness, worry about being fair to yourself." He gave a small smile. "Trust me, the court will give you plenty even without the secret account. What your father left you isn't about punishing your husband. It's about your freedom." Zalika nodded slowly. Deep down, she knew her father would have said the same. "All right," she said. "What do I do?" "First, you don't sign anything," he replied. "No letters, no friendly agreements. Second, you keep your cool. We'll file a counter petition. And yes," he smiled again, "for the first hearing, you're going to need a suit." 3 weeks later, the Fulton County Courthouse felt like déjà vu, only with the roles reversed. Last time she'd walked into a courthouse, she'd been in old jeans, hollow-eyed from crying. Now she entered in a dark navy suit that fit like armor. Her hair was neatly styled, her face lightly made up, her eyes finally rested. Melvin walked beside her, calm and solid, a leather folder in his hand. Behind them, his young associate carried a laptop and a stack of files. Kwesi was already in the courtroom, wearing his polished developer suit, standing next to the same family lawyer who had once helped them sign company documents and penthouse papers. He turned when he saw her. For a second, his face went slack. He clearly hadn't expected to see a self-possessed woman with her own counsel. He'd expected the broken one with swollen eyes. "Zalika," he said, "Who are you with?" "With my attorney," she answered calmly. "You didn't think I'd sign those papers without a legal opinion, did you?" Melvin merely nodded politely at Kwesi, as if he were just another file, and took his place. The hearing began. Kwesi's lawyer started with the same old song: successful entrepreneur husband, dependent wife, emotional instability, time away caring for her sick mother, neglecting marital duties. This time the song didn't play as well. First, Zalika had an attorney who knew which questions to ask. Second, the court had documents, statements, receipts, emails. "Mr. Surname," the judge said coolly, flipping through papers, "you withdrew $120,000 from the joint account 3 days before filing for divorce. Where did those funds go?" Business expenses," Kwesi stammered. "Investments." "Those investments appear to be a series of luxury clothing and jewelry purchases in a single boutique," Melvin cut in, lifting a stack of receipts, "all charged to a company card you control. Interestingly, that same boutique appears in a social media story that very day, posted by one Inaya Surname, a local model. Coincidence?" There were a few muted chuckles in the gallery. The judge's frown deepened. Kwesi's lawyer tried to steer away, but every move was met with another pile of evidence. Joint funds funneled into Kwesi's personal accounts. Tax returns, listing Zalika as a partner in the business. Emails where he called her his co-founder while courting investors. "It's funny," Melvin said dryly at one point, "how often men discover their wives were just housewives only when the time comes to divide assets." By the end of that hearing, the judge said something Kwesi definitely hadn't expected. "At this stage, the court sees signs of attempted concealment of marital assets," he said. "All accounts under Mr. Surname's control will be temporarily frozen pending full discovery. Mrs. Okafor is granted temporary right of occupancy in the marital residence until a final division is determined. Support and division of business interests will be addressed at a later date." Kwesi's face went gray. Zalika felt a calm wave rise inside her. Not gloating, not revenge, just the solid feeling of balance returning after being shoved out of her own life. The war over assets dragged on for months, hearings, settlement offers, delay tactics from Kwesi's side. But Zalika suddenly had something she'd never had before: time and resources. She rented a small but cozy apartment near the park and moved there with her mother once the older woman was well enough to leave Alabama. She didn't bother returning to the penthouse even though she had the right. That place was no longer a home, just a stage where she'd been humiliated. She hired a good therapist and finally started to sleep for more than a few hours at a time. With a private banking advisor's help, she set up a trust in her mother's name so medical bills would never again be a fear. The rest of her father's money stayed largely invested, just as he'd wanted. The anchor, not a circus. One evening, as they were reviewing documents, Melvin looked up. "If we push hard," he said, "we can get you half his company plus strong support. Do you want that?" Zalika thought for a long moment. She pictured Kwesi in the lobby throwing her bag at her feet, his voice saying, "You came into this marriage with nothing. You leave with nothing." "I want him to understand he doesn't own me," she said. "Support, yes, as the law requires. But the company, I don't want to be tied to anything that keeps his name in my finances for years." "Then we use your rights as leverage," Melvin replied. "We'll negotiate a buyout for your share. He pays you out in cash or assets, and you walk away owning nothing with his name on it." "That's perfect," she said. That's exactly what they did. Kwesi raged. He tried to bargain, but he was cornered. Either pay and gain full control of his company or have the court freeze and dissect it in front of everyone. Frozen accounts and angry investors don't mix well. Eventually, he signed. He believed he was buying his freedom from a burdensome ex-wife. He never realized he was purchasing something far more valuable for her, the right to forget him. The final hearing was brief. The judge read the decree in a flat tone. Marriage dissolved. Marital assets divided per the settlement. Mrs. Okafor receives a cash payout for her share of the business, half of remaining marital savings, and spousal support for 3 years. Zalika listened, feeling not triumph, but an unfamiliar steadiness. In her mind, the money from the buyout was already slotted into accounts and projects. Compared to her inheritance, the numbers weren't enormous, but seeing them carved out of the man who had called her nothing felt appropriate. When the judge adjourned, everyone rose. Kwesi caught up to her in the hallway. "Zalika," he said, "this went way too far. You know we could have settled quietly. Why drag me through court? Now everyone knows my accounts were frozen." He looked more tired than arrogant now, but the entitlement was still there. She looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, felt no sting, only distance. "You threw me out with $10, she reminded him calmly. "Us being here isn't my choice. It's just the consequence of yours." He snorted. "Come on. You're still nobody. Without me, you'd—" He stopped because at that moment Kenneth Lawson walked by carrying a briefcase. He paused and nodded politely. "Ms. Okafor," he said, "Private Banking asked me to remind you, when you have a moment, please drop by. We've prepared some options for the new funds that hit your account." Kwesi blinked. "Private Banking?" he repeated. "What?" "Yes," Zalika said evenly. "I have a few things to discuss with the bank." Kenneth smiled, wished her a good day, and walked away. Suspicion flickered across Kwesi's face. "What things?" he demanded. "You found a job? Somebody gave you a loan?" For the first time, she clearly saw it in his eyes. Not just arrogance, but fear. Fear that someone he'd labeled as less than him might exist outside his control. She smiled, not cruelly, almost gently. "Don't worry, Kwesi," she said. "I'm not interested in your money anymore. I have my own." His eyebrows shot up. "What money?" he blurted. "Zalika, where did—" "That's a story you don't have the right to hear anymore," she cut in. "We're not we now, and you were only right about one thing." "And what's that?" he snapped. "I did come into the marriage with nothing," she said softly. "Nothing in the sense that I had no idea how much stronger I was than you wanted me to be." She turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, a small man in an expensive suit. 6 months passed. Warm summer air rolled through Atlanta again, carrying the smell of barbecue and waffle cones. In a new office occupying a half-renovated floor above a row of shops, only one light burned late. Zalika sat at her desk, her own desk. After the divorce, therapy, and meetings with financial planners, she had done something she never would have imagined in her before life. Instead of running to a quiet little town or simply buying a big house, far away from it all, she invested in something else. She opened a small foundation that helped women who had been thrown out of their homes after divorce with nowhere to go, just like she had been. The foundation paid for lawyers, temporary housing, and retraining courses. A portion of the trust's earnings went to support small farms and businesses back in Alabama, a quiet tribute to her father, the farmer who once saved a tiny bank. Above the entrance, gold letters spelled Anchor House Foundation. Below them, the logo, a simple anchor shaped into a heart. Every time she saw it, she thought of her father. "You want money to be an anchor, not a chain," he seemed to say from that letter. Late one evening, closing her laptop, she glanced at her phone. Notifications blinked. A report from the bank about her investments growing. An email from Melvin. Another client had just won her case and kept the house. A message from her mother. "I walked all the way to church without the cane today. The doctors say I'm doing great." Zalika smiled. At the bottom of the list was a friend request from an account with a familiar face and an awkward fake smile. Quasi. She didn't hit accept or decline. She simply blocked and deleted. The action took less than a second. Inside, it sounded louder than the judge's gavel. She stepped out onto the balcony of her new home. Not a glass penthouse, but a light, spacious house, bought with her own money. The city lights shimmered across the skyline like 1,000 stories, each window holding someone who probably also thought their ship was sinking tonight. She rested her hand on the railing and whispered into the humid Atlanta night. "Thank you, Papa, for the anchor, but now I know how to swim on my own." Her phone buzzed again, a notification from the anonymous channel where she shared stories like hers. New subscribers, new comments. "I thought I was the only one. Your story gave me the courage to leave. I'm listening to this while packing my bags." Zalika took a deep breath and smiled. Her husband had kicked her out, certain he'd taken everything away. The bank had panicked when an old card woke up a forgotten covenant. She herself had been shocked to realize she was never the poor, dependent wife she'd been told she was. And now, with her ship not just afloat, but firmly on course, she finally understood. The real value wasn't the number in her account. It was what she chose to do once she realized that number was hers, and hers alone.